Hi students, welcome to another session. So far we are dealing with Unit 3 Basis of Human Behavior, and we have discussed the basic unit of the human, that is the neuron. The structure of neuron is discussed, and how the neurons form the nervous system, and the structure of nervous system is dealt in the earlier session, and we are dealing with the central nervous system. And this central nervous system is the key part, and where the human brain and spinal cord are parts. And so far we are dealing with the structure of the brain. The structure of the brain, majorly there are three components, that is hindbrain, midbrain and forebrain. And in the earlier sessions we have dealt each topic individually, and we have come up close to the forebrain. And then in that, another important part, particularly cerebrum, which is called cerebral cortex. We are dealing with cerebral cortex, and in this session we will complete that cerebral cortex part, which is really important, and high level functions are involved and controlled by this part only. So we will complete that cerebrum part and spinal cord in this session, and let us move into the session. So the topic for today, as said, that is cerebrum and spinal cord. And to recall the forebrain, in the forebrain there are four important parts, that is hypothalamus, thalamus, limbic system and the cerebrum. In the limbic system there is hippocampus and amygdala. All these functions are the key information received from the sense organs, and then transfer the responses to the motor organs or the functioning organs. So if you can recall, the hypothalamus is responsible for the internal functions, and this limbic system, that internal functions are like sleeping, temperature, heartbeat, uh, the breathing. All these functions are controlled, are under the control of hypothalamus, and thalamus is also the key area in helping controlling these functions, very connected to the hypothalamus. Thalamus acts as a relay station and mediates the sensory organs, receives sensory signals and transfer it to cerebrum, and then receives the information from cerebrum and transfer them to the send these signals to the motor functioning organs. So as the thalamus is connected to cerebrum, we have to deal with cerebrum. Cerebrum is the 1.5 mm to 4.4 mm. It is 4 mm thickness layer covering all these internal organs of the brain, that is limbic system or the forebrain. And this cerebrum is like it is formed by the collection of billions of neurons and axons. And the cerebrum part, which is divided into two hemispheres, and most importantly, this is the largest coverage for the human brain. It covers two-third part of the brain. Okay, from the hindbrain to the forebrain. So, and let us see what is in this cerebrum. The cerebrum is divided into two symmetrical halves, that is left hemisphere and right hemisphere. These combinedly called as cerebral hemispheres. Although the two hemispheres appear identical, as said, the half part is seen on the as a two-dimensional object. We can only see half part, but actually the brain is a complete, like a football structure, like a egg structure. Okay, so, and the other very important point is that it is a combination of two halves, like 50-50%. And it is also known that a half brain completely works fine. A half brain completely works fine. It can carry out all the functions of a complete brain. The 50% brain is enough. Like a kidney, right? A single kidney can function, can help a human body to function effectively, sufficiently for a human being. So all the organs in that way also, the brain is divided into two halves, and each half has the capability to carry out all the functions. But as as they are available, they share the functions. They share the functions. They share the functions between two of them, and there is another one. They exclusively perform some areas, that emotional, behavioral, cognitive functions, that eyes related, ear related, skin related functions, reflex actions, all these things. So for example, and even functionally, one hemisphere usually dominates the other. Say for example, the right-handed person, the left hemisphere is active. For the left-handed person, the right hemisphere is active. So, and even the human body, the left side is controlled by the right hemisphere. The, the right side of the body is controlled by the left hemisphere. So all these functions, as said, even though they are symmetrical and identical and they can carry out individually, as both hemispheres are available, they equally distribute themselves. They allot these functions to work effectively, to carry out the functioning of the human behavior or human body effectively. They share these functions. For example, the left hemisphere usually controls language, left for language. The right hemisphere usually specialized deal with images. Generally, even the theoretical part is dealt with left hemisphere, the animation part is divided with the right hemisphere. Usually we come across this comparison. Spatial relationships, special recognition, pattern recognition. The logical part is carried out in right hemisphere. The general part, black and white things, the theoretical parts, illogical things, regular day-to-day activities will be carried out by the left hemisphere. But still, these two hemispheres are connected by a white bundle of myelinated fibers called corpus callosum. These are connected, interconnected. This is myelinated sheet. As for example, say in the neuron we have seen an axon, right? An axon. Axon has a myelin sheet. Such myelinated fibers are connecting the both hemispheres, which is called corpus callosum. Corpus callosum that carries messages back and forth between two hemispheres. This connects these two hemispheres to carry out the functions effectively. Both the hemispheres are important to complete a task. For example, eyes see, but the hands react. Ears listen, and the legs react. But all these functions are connected by the both left and right hemispheres to both to function effectively. Okay, so this is the cerebrum in the first basic difference, that is left hemisphere and right hemisphere. And as we said, it is connected. It is connected by corpus callosum and treated as a single brain. And in the next slide, if we see cerebral cortex, in the earlier slide, in the earlier session, we discussed that cerebrum is also called a cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex has also been divided into 4 lobes. These are the colors which gives you a better understanding, such as attention, thinking, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe and occipital lobe. Like the forebrain, midbrain and the hindbrain, the cerebrum has the front part, back part, the down part, and the this is like a right side and the left side. The parietal lobe is over the thalamus. If you can remember, thalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, and hypothalamus, etc., pituitary gland, all these are covered in this area. The temporal lobe covers these things. Okay, the auditory and visual information is covered in the temporal lobe. So the frontal lobe, the front part of the brain, so you can remember, right? This is the back part, that is the neck part. This is the forehead part. Forehead part is the forebrain and frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is mainly concerned with cognitive functions. With the cognitive functions such as attention, thinking, memory, reasoning, problem solving, decision making, creativity, communication, all these parts. And but it also exerts inhibit autonomic and emotional responses. Like for example, say in the thalamus or the RAS system, which is part of the cerebrum, like cerebellum, these actions are concerned. The cerebellum is connected, these functions, to the frontal lobe. The breathing, the autonomic things like breathing, sweating, sleeping, temperature control, the contraction of lungs, the blinking of eyelids, etc., will be controlled in this frontal lobe. The parietal lobe is like midbrain. In the midbrain, like the middle lobe is mainly concerned with cutaneous sensations and their coordination with visual and auditory sensations. The sensory organs functions are related to the parietal lobe. Okay, the temporal lobe is primarily concerned in the processing of auditory information, memory for symbolic sounds, words resides here. This is like the memory, recalling, information processing, everything happens in the temporal lobe. It's like the limbic system, thalamus, hypothalamus, or it will be part of these are connected to the temporal lobe. Understanding speech and written language depends on this lobe. Okay, next, the occipital lobe mainly concerned with the visual information. It is believed that interpretation of visual impulses, memory for a visual stimuli, and color visual orientation is performed by this lobe. So, if you can see, the parietal lobe deals with the sensory organs, both visual and auditory sensations. But how it is connected? This is connected to the temporal lobe and processes the information, the limbic system. All these things are available here, right? And then, particularly, temporal lobe is connected to the auditory information. What about the occipital lobe? Occipital lobe deals with the visual information. Parietal is both, but the specialized thing, temporal lobe, is for auditory. Temporal lobe is auditory. Occipital lobe is for visual information. It deals with the eyes. This deals with the ears. And both these are combinedly related to the parietal lobe. Both visual and auditory are concerned. The sensory functions, sensation, the sensory organs and functioning is performed in the parietal lobe. But the actions, the reactions has to be like visual stimuli, memory processing, impulses, visual orientation, everything will be performed. The reactions will be carried out in the occipital lobe. The language which is heard, speech which has the information processing, all these things will be processed in the temporal lobe. So as far as consider everything is interrelated but has a special function to do. So this is what the cerebral cortex is. So by this we complete the structure of the human brain. So you can recall it with the earlier slide and recall all the parts, that is forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, and then we discussed about the structure of the brain, what are all the parts, medulla oblongata, cerebellum, the stem, that is pons, and the different parts involved in midbrain and the forebrain, and then in the forebrain itself again it is divided into four parts, that is thalamus, hypothalamus, hippocampus, like limbic system, and then it is divided into further divided the cerebrum. The cerebrum is discussed in detail. We have to remember all these things. The three parts: frontal, midbrain, forebrain, and hindbrain. All these parts are discussed again. Then the forebrain itself has the four parts. The four parts are discussed, and again the cerebellum is discussed in detail. So all these functions are really important, and this gives a basic idea of which parts are responsible for carrying out these actions or the behavior of the human being. So let us move forward. Psychologists, physiologists and psychologists have tried to identify specific functions associated with specific brain structures. They have found that no activity of the brain is performed only by a single part of the cortex. Particularly in the cortex, as we discussed, the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe, these are interconnected, but the special functions, and again I am telling, a brain, a half brain can carry out all the functions, even though it is divided, but still it can carry every function. In the damaged human being brain, the other part of the brain can be, and there is also left and right differences. For the left-handed persons, right brain is active. But what about the right-handed persons? For the right-handed persons, left brain is active. So this confusion cannot be ignored. Normally, other parts are involved, but it is also correct that there is some localization of the functions. That is what temporal and parietal lobes we discussed. Occipital lobe for visual, temporal for auditory. That is for a particular function, a particular part of cortex plays a more important role than other parts. Yes, this part picks up the function. This part picks up the function and play an important role. That's how the brain works. But it is interdependent on other things. As said, the spinal cord is dependent on brain, but still the spinal cord has some actions to do. But every part has its own role to play. The neurons has the role to play. Okay. For example, if you are driving a car, you see the road and the other vehicles by the function of your occipital lobe. Hear the horns by the temporal lobe. See how when you are driving a car, these lobes are functioning. Do many motor activities controlled by parietal lobe, that is visual and auditory, both it is connected, and make decision with the help of frontal lobe. So see how the brain it's functioning, or can for the cognitive functions, whether to brake, whether to take a decision, you have to use the frontal lobe. The parietal lobe carries the motor functioning, both deciding on the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe. The visual and auditory information they will process and give it to the legs or the hands to turn the steering wheel or the brake. So all the lobes, but they are interdependent, but has a role to play. The whole brain acts as a well coordinated unit in which different parts contribute their functions separately. Yes, all the brain activities, yeah, even though we separate and has a functioning, but everything should coordinate. That is why it is the magical Pandora box which we are calling from the first unit. So brain is a superficial thing for anything that has happened in the human body. Still a long way to go, but we have the basic understanding. With that understanding, we are able to decode the behavior of how a human being behaves. So let us move to the next slide. So that is the main functioning of the brain so far we dealt with, and we will move forward with the spinal cord. The spinal cord is part of the central nervous system. This is the second important part which is connected. The spinal cord is a long rope-like collection of nerve fibers. In the earlier sessions, like the spinal cord, we discussed the ganglia, right? So the separate parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, we discussed these connections and how these parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system works, and particularly these nerves are, for example, say this is the backbone, okay, because this is the two-dimensional picture. In it, these nerve fibers are protected in this backbone, okay. Rope-like fibers in the spine, these are all the nerve fibers from the brain. The hundreds of billions of neurons, they pair with the nerves and come down to the brain stem and distribute to the whole body. In this mid part of the body itself is connected to the every motor organ, okay, which run along the full length of the side of inside of the spine. That is what, if you can touch and feel your backbone, it is a strong iron like structure, but everything inside the nerve fibers, every rope, it is like rope like collection of nerve fibers which run along the full length of spine. In one end is connected to the medulla, that is the hindbrain or the brain stem, and another is free end at the tail end. From the tail end, they will be connected to the legs and the back part and other organs, okay. These are the hands. Its structure all along its length is similar. So all the bone from the neck to the hip, it is similar and unidirectional and uniformly spread. The butterfly shaped mass of gray matter, for example, say it is like the gray matter present in the center of the spinal cord. Like from the spinal cord, these both discs, you call them discs, or the cranial nerves or the spinal nerves, all these nerves are connected, and these are the structural, the wooden snake like structure. If you move it, if you move your back, you can flexibly move it. Surrounding the gray matter and the white matter of the spinal cord, which is composed of ascending and descending neural tracts. These tracts, collection of nerve fibers, connect the brain with the rest of the body. That is, they move upside and downside. This is upside and downside. The spinal cord plays the role of a huge cable which exchanges innumerable messages with the nervous system, central nervous system. There are two main functions of the spinal cord. Firstly, it carries sensory impulses coming from the lower parts of the body to the brain. What is the spinal cord does? The lower part of the body, that is legs and other motor organs, all these functions will be connected to the spine. Secondly, it performs some simple reflexes that do not involve the brain. So we will see reflex actions in the coming slide. Simple reflexes involves a sensory nerve, a motor nerve, and association neurons of the gray matter of the spinal cord. The association neurons is the mixed nerves. Both are responsible for these actions. Okay. So let us see what is there in these reflex actions. So basically spinal cord, it is the main function is the protection of these nerve fibers. These nerves are protected in that shell like the spine. The whole length is protected with these nerves. But if you can see, for example, a house has a wiring protected in the PVC pipes, right? But why it is like it is the protection, it is a layer of protection which protects them to insulates the house from the being these electric wires, right? In the same way, the spinal cord acts as a stiff protection for the narrow fibers inside, passing inside the spinal cord and connected to the bottom of the lower side of the body. Okay, this is the main functioning of the spinal cord which we have to learn. And there is a special and unique functioning of the spinal cord, that is the reflex action, where there is no like medulla oblongata. Medulla will be the medulla and spine will combinedly take these reflex actions. Particularly here it is defined as spinal cord. A reflex as an involuntary action. What do you mean by reflex? A reflex is an involuntary action. It is like unconscious level that occurs very quickly after a specific kind of stimulation. The reflex action takes place automatically without conscious decisions of the brain. Reflexes are without conscious, that are unconscious decisions of the brain. The brain is not there involved. Reflex actions are inherited in our nervous system through evolutionary process. For example, the DNA and RNA through the chromosomes, through the genes. During the womb itself, the parental and parental side reactions will be inherited, like eye blinking, for that is to protect the dryness of eyes. Whenever any object comes near our eyes, our eyelids blink. Not only the regular actions, these reflex actions serves to protect. So when you encounter an object, for example, a needle comes near your eye, you will close your lids, right? And for example, some heat, you will close your eyes with the hand. For example, during the sun on a sunny day, you will cover your eyes. Of course, these are not the reflex actions, but in any dangerous, when any object suddenly, like a fly, any insect uh, comes near to your eye, you will close the eyelids, right? And normally eyelids also, eye blinking is also a reflex action which is carried out without consciousness. Reflexes serve to protect the organism from potential threats and preserves life. So, for example, say the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex, the forebrain to take the decisions, it takes much time. But for the life-saving purpose, these reflex actions will help us. Pulling away from the hot or cold objects, breathing, stretching, all the unconscious, knee jerk, pupil constriction, all these functions will help us. The heavy light for the pupil constriction, knee jerk, all this happens for the life to carry out. These are all during the evolutionary process. These are all learned through the evolutionary process. This is not a day-to-day activity which we learn. With the generations, the lakhs of years, the millions of years, we learned these things. Most reflex actions are carried out by the spinal cord and do not involve the brain. With the help of medulla oblongata, we will be carrying out, and particularly spinal cord has its own decision making system under the reflex actions. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any queries, please write to us and discuss. And particularly in this session, we have dealt in detail about cerebrum. We have finished with the brain structure, and then we dealt with the spinal cord, importance of the spinal cord, what is it for, how it connects to the body, and then we have seen the reflex actions, how it command. It is the reflex actions are being commanded by the spinal cord. So that's all for today. Thank you so much. Have a great day.